this experience is exchange national experiences, international experiences about women and drug trafficking. This is a an event promoted by the UNODC and the Ministry of Justice and of Law. I would like to excuse ourselves. We were tweaking some very brief technical adjustments that we had. We have connection in Germany, Bogota, and at the Caribbean coast of Colombia. My name is Camilo Perez. I am going to be with you in this third block. Please remember that today we were in the morning in a first block of production where we had all these roles gaps in the gender gap. At the second session of the morning, we were in the production in terms of poppy, coca leaf, and marijuana cannabis. And now we're going to see from the experiences, and we have a very interesting panel of people that I'm going to introduce, and we're going to give it a focus from the solution perspective, and this is what we have there. And then we have in there in the alternative, and we have equity in there, and empowerment and citizenship. And then we have here, we need to remind all the members that in the chat, se está metiendo otro ruido. And then we have there, and all the social networks, there we're posing other questions to the guest speakers, and there's going to be a venue here to solve all the concerns if we want to broaden it in the topic. I mean, if what we do is actually we have to start from the solution and to try to see all the strategies of the alternative programs that's been running for at least 3 decades in Colombia, and we have the experiences in several countries, but here in Colombia in particular we have 35 years maybe working in terms of alternative means of development, always seeking the active participation of rural communities through which we can have project concertation and substitution. And well, this at the end to build them for these families that have been affected by all the phenomena of illicit crops. So this has always had the end goal of reducing or eliminating those means of survival through illegal economies, always finding rural integral development to make it the catalyst to change those models of life in the rural life. That facilitates the transit towards the illicit economies, always with sustained income. And from that we're going to go more in depth with one of the guest speakers, because that she has her own evidence, and she's going to tell us from her experience how was that transit and how we're going to have really a sustainable, profitable one that actually gives it something that is very important, that they have the illicit economy, and which was dignity. I'm going to introduce the panel briefly, and these alternative development programs here in Colombia, where we begin to register data from the 2003, where we have a record of 230,000 families through the different programs of alternative development, 484 municipalities around in all the provinces in Colombia. So these are very important figures, and specifically in the last program, which is the PENIS, PINIS, and is something that starts from the peace agreement between the Colombian government and the FARC guerrilla group. One begins to visualize this role of women in the different links of drug trafficking. So now we're beginning to see that about 31% of the beneficiaries in that program, they have a sort of a woman as a single mother leading the home. Around 30% of the beneficiaries of this program are women. So we're starting to see these specific roles and how they began to promote different alternatives to the illicit crops to develop these models and these life projects. So they were, at least in what we were able to cater to in through UNODC, there were 23,100 families with single mothers that were supporting each other. and they started to dedicate themselves to different production lines to do cocoa, sugar plantations, sugar processing, coffee growing, cattle raising. I mean, a whole array or 20 production lines that were concerted and so on for models of food security, which is kind of the first phase, and we actually had very good results. Another one of the links that we're having here, and that was really truly very important, and this was something that we had never worked there with the issue of the so-called growers and so on, that they were the ones who were gathering the coca leaf, and there we realized also that almost like half of those scrapers were women who scraped the leaf, and so they were so involved in this specific role, which was actually to scrape the leaf off the branch. 46% were in that scenario, which was quite hostile, obviously in conditions of weak security with all the matters here is actually is a setting where you breach all the things associated with breaching the rights of women, so that an idea was to take them out there and sort of drive them into the formal economy, the legal economy, and even as a matter of fact, in terms of in difficult moments that perhaps a year and a half ago when the pandemic um, issued so many restriction to movement, the main way of sort of overcoming this dire situation. It was women who provided this. It was the women, all the activities. I think that the whole world had stopped, and three of them, they continued with their work because they had to continue with that task of being scrapers, and they begin to be social managers for social projects within their hamlets. They started to produce face masks that I think that everybody lived. There was a shortage of face masks. They started to build in the big cities. Imagine in those towns, and those absolutely there was no face mask. So they promoted the manufacturing of these face masks, and through the programs, all bioprotective gear. Where you didn't have internet, they promoted all the strategies of pedagogy for children and for vulnerable populations to see how they handle all the issues of the pandemic, reforestation, improving their environment by doing gardening and planting theirs, and women solved things. And that was one of the thoughts that we had, the role of women to generate solutions to these types of problems with illicit crops. Now we're going to go more in depth, and we have a panel that is very, very noteworthy, because we have three women, and we're going to see it from three different approaches: from the approach of research, from the approach of institutionality, but also from their living experiences. So that is why our first guest speaker is going to be Sandra Palacios Martinez. She is part of the Coffee Growers Cooperations of the Santa Marta Snowcap Mountain Range, and she is a coffee producer, and she is from Monda, Santa Marta, a very small hamlet that Santa Marta has, and she is the founder for more than a decade ago, and she has been for 9 years working there, and as a manager, she's a great leader for the region. She's a passionate leader, and she loves the cooperative way of doing things, and she's a living example. I said at the beginning that alternative development is not only sustainable, it really is profitable. As she mentioned, she gave something that these crops didn't give, and it was the profitability. And then we're going to have, from the institutional focus, Miss Diana Manjarrets, and she is part of the network of management and the territory, and she works in substituting illicit crops. She is an economist, and she has a master's in policy development with specialty in gender development and rural development. and she will tell us how we incorporate the gender perspective in the pennies, the ones that we mentioned a few minutes ago. And now we're going to have from Germany, Eva Dietz. She is a researcher. She's going to share all the experiences that we have had here in Latin America. And she's a sociologist from the Berlin Free University and from the Latin American studies. And she's an expert, obviously, in rural development, in reducing gender violence and gender equity. And I was saying that pretty much since the 90s, she has been developing her career here in Latin America, especially in what has been those coca basins of Bolivia, Peru, and Colombia. And those places she was there at the nuclei of those coca producing areas, and she was performing some studies in terms of gender focus, reducing gender violence around these economies of the illicit trade. Without further ado, I would like to hand over the mic to Sandra Palacios. Sandra, welcome, and please share with us your vision in respect of the topic of women's and alternative development. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the invitation. My name is Sandra Idet Palacio Martinez, and I am a founding partner and a producer in the INIEL, and I am part of the Sierra Nevada Cooperative for 9 years now. I am there with the group. We were part of that hand eradication program of the coca crop with the ministry, and from there we started, all this dream of creating an organization, or in this case, a cooperative, where we can live within the legal commerce with products and to be able to in due time to being profitable and sustainable, and above all to be able to walk proud of the fact that we are producing our way of life legally. I am going to be introducing our cooperative. This is my presentation. I started, and of course, in a professional era right now in the 7th semester of business administration. I am in love with what I do. I love my job, and I share what I know with all my producer colleagues, the knowledge that I have and the satisfaction that I may have of performing a great task like it is to produce farming products, agriculture. Here we have different historic landmarks. On the 27th of October, we were founded, and between those 65 of them, 25 are women. We produce coffee with organic certification, fair trade coffee prices, and when we have warming care for women, we are members of the International Alliance of Women, and also we are part of the green businesses in this area of the Magdalena province. We are in the northern area of the snow-capped mountains of Santa Marta. We produce high quality coffee, and we are selling for the markets of the US. We are also selling for Japan, Canada, and Germany. This is our group of women, which I was telling you not long ago. We in 2016 we made the decision of certifying ourselves on the Star Seal, and this enables us to sell the coffee with a little surcharge. Aside from having organic production and fair trade of coffee, we can sell it in the European market at a higher price. They are very our women's coffee are requested frequently. They want to support these initiatives. So here in what we focus, since the Pueblo, Nevada, in the issues of the rights that women have in the farm. Many of the women live day in, day out, a lot of ill treatment. Their rights are not respected. They're not valued. Their work is not valued as it should be. So we in Sierra Nevada, we have been working in all these aspects to improve their quality of life and their environment so that we can provide them consultancy services and also that they live dignified and that we receive a fair price. So now we are actually diversifying there and we are with these coffee ones, and then we have coffee and agriculture, and then agriculture that we're exporting it for Germany, and we sell it as a fine coffee because here in the Sierra Nevada of Santa Marta, for the very same conditions, for our location, our our soil, it has some organoelectric capabilities that are very appreciated in France and in Germany, and of course we can do theirs on some local coffees and white coffees, and then we have there, and then we have some certified ones with organic coffees, and this year we're actually getting certified with the Fair Trade Seal. In agriculture, we're actually taking advantage of this one in our farming crops, and that all ones are organic. We protect them, and we have them, and we also receive a benefit from the bees. This is our coffee brand that is sold locally and also nationally, and it's called Woman Coffee. It is a coffee with a medium taste and with a cup profile of 84 points. It's the one that is sold the most. We also have a line of coffee in the rest of producer ones, but the one that is sold the most is the Women Coffee. We have a quality lab to actually do the tasting of all the cups that actually of the coffee that comes to the cooperative. We have our own processing plant so that we can actually we all peel and toast and pack our coffee. We do that with our own machines. We do all that entire process. Also, we have our cocoa lab, which last year we acquired, and the product there's, which we had some fermentation tanks, and we have some humidity controls. We have all the equipment and so on, where we have the name of the coffees that actually we sell. And of all the income that we receive additionally from the coffee that we sell, we have a marketing firm that is called Women Car, and we, the women, and here only the women that actually propose and approve, that actually take the course that we manage to sell with an additional price. We have there some budgets to maintain this certification and the technical assistance. There we have publicity for our women, women's security and production diversification, and then we have quality production coffee, and then we have savings for the financial expenses for all these women. We do not mix resources with the rest of the resources that the cooperative have for the other products. So here we have distributed all the line items in each assembly where we're only going to have there, we're going to see what we do with our resources, and there we kind of do so what needs to be done that is necessary. This is our personnel plan of Sierra Nevada, and here, as you can see, we have many women and many youngsters because this enables us to be updated, that we are going to actually give them the opportunity of our youngsters so that they empower themselves and they get trained, because they are our the sort of backup generation, our handover generation that we're working. And here, this is the data. There we have our web page, we have a virtual store, we are very active, and all of our information. We also have Facebook and Instagram, where we are permanently there doing the promotions of our coffee and so on. And then we have there, and then the experience there, and to try to transmit what we do through our coffee. Well, that would be the presentation that I had for you today. I don't know if anyone would have a question as one. Well, Sandro, thank you very much for that presentation. And in the Q&A session, we're going to have it at the very end. So we are much obliged so that we can have it and we can continue with the next panelist. And that it's Diana Manjarres, in the director of the crop substitution in the AET.
Sandra, could you please help us with the microphone, please? If you can close it. The floor is yours, Diana. Good afternoon. Thank you. Thank you, Camilo. It is a pleasure to me to be able to share this space with you. Thank you for giving me the possibility to tell you from our experience and from what we have lived on how we're opening channels for women, specifically to vindicate all these processes in the framework of justice that implies the transit towards legality in the substitution. So let's go ahead with this. We would like to tell you why it is important from the challenges, which are central in the moments that we're thinking about the substitution focus in gender, that we would like to talk about. And why do we think it's important, as you were saying, in the practice, which are our pillars, which is our addressing to this, and what are we doing with these pillars that we're constructing with these definite actions for women. Well, we have been speaking about this throughout this space, and we have seen this jump out to sight with the different things that women and men go through in this framework, and the different type of violences that are tending to naturalize themselves. And as we were speaking about this morning in different scenarios, how masculinity that is traditional are some fundamental patterns in some places and not in others, and this also implies a dynamic that is more heterogeneous and that we must bear, because when we are in 56 municipalities, there is a huge dynamic in the municipalities and in the departments, in villages, and communitarian that we have to speak about. As well, we consider that it's fundamental, that is very clear in the Colombian nature, and is the prevalence of the productive and labor done by women, which has been feminized, and a great number of low workloads that we have that we do not get paid for. And we can say that connecting with this transit and participation, there are some risks and some threats that are differentiated, but it also increases with these active processes in participation. The moment that we're going to show these interests is now we're going to speak a little bit about this topic. So now we are connecting this with the participation of women in the decision-making spaces, and this was a focus that, and why do we consider that as gender focus was so key through these challenges. So please help me with the following slide, and now we're going to begin to state and on the substitution leading the corporation that's focused on the gender and how they were creating work. So here you can see what are, this is what we're starting from, what I'm calling to define some rules in the game and try to set forth some addressing lines that would allow us to take the deployment to all these families, to the 35,000 women that are the holders here, and how this institutionality logics would allow us to have to advance in the operational components part, as we were mentioning moments ago, from the productive side, and all this technical and comprehensive side, and how these variables arrived to consider, and we started having progress on this. So this from the operational and the logistic part, the interventions in the program. And now I would say this clearly, we are speaking with the active participation. We see that there's a decree bill that is creating this project. We began in 2019 with 106 women, showing the interest and the needs that these women had in substitution, but we closed 2021 with growth of 195%. Now we have more than 270 women leading this institution, and this gives us a different view on the surroundings of these elements and what we were speaking about moments ago, how we accompany them throughout these stages and the transition to the legality in these places, then in the terms of autonomy. And this economical autonomy is thought out to be through the logic and to having projects, specific tasks that would allow us to mitigate these gaps that women have, especially in the rural areas, how we can connect an infrastructure from the family and collective side that will facilitate these organizations to carry out these researches for women. As Sandra, she has an important role here when they're collective and we are associating them with the legal framework and this logic. As you were saying, they are well known as these communitary leaders that have projects around how we can define this business ideas and models and they're in trade, and we give them tools so they can have this from their goods and from the dynamics in these dynamics that will allow them, as we were showing you moments ago, to have sustainability for these projects. And this has been another one of our pillars, and we have closes down with the vulnerability, starting from the challenges that these women have had. It is important to the logics from these places, from their families, from the communities, which is the environment with this family, everything that has to do with the public side, in security, in terms of how we can tackle these security actions and to lead this program. So please help me with the following slide. We would like to enter into matters on what these addressing lines are when we're speaking about normative framework in folks, making emphasis on with women, and this is the beginning, how we're connecting all these necessities for women in this gender focus, but that will also allow us to cover these needs and these elements so women can be active subjects in this concentration and volunteer to give up these illicit crops. This is the first thing we have to address, and these women that have been linked to the substitution processes in Colombia. It was very important with all this exercise that we carried out with the United Nations to acknowledge these particularities and this capture for females, and how we can begin with these dynamics from the economy. What is this transit? But these are also some important roles. Why is so much poverty once we have a female head? And we also have a line that we must address and these elements, and here you already know them, so we're going to mention them briefly, and the assistance for them to have food so they can eradicate these crops, and they can have some elements, and they can connect with all those needs that the women might have to set forth with this programs. So everything that has to do with the assistance, with the comprehensive assistance, and everything has to do with the collecting part. It's not only a marvelous scenario, but in terms of this, for me to be able to have these roles, it would be a lot. And this joint developing the same work or task, let's say. So this is something that is fascinating around, which is basically our line that is closing all this addressing of these interventions. And now we're going to see what these transversal actions are in the closing these gaps in this gender and how we're carrying them out and how we're carrying the intervention strategies before this discrimination that we have in genders. And last but not least, important to connect all these strategies and all these addressing lines that so we can carry out some naturalization as we were speaking at the beginning and how it results to be super important to consider all these patterns that are secure, more secure in some places than others, and all the commitments that we have. I have directors, heads, not only in the implementation framework, but also indicators in the development plan and compass, and how we're building these follow-up logics to guarantee all this intention and everything that's around the linking of our gender in these institutions. So I would like to wrap this up with what's next, please? How these dressing lines have given us some, which we are organizing right now as the programs and as the direction of substitution, as we were mentioning right now. These frameworks are giving us some guidelines, some central guidelines that would allow us to define some commitments with the national government and the roadmap around these commitments as well, and how we can connect these needs that the women have through these logics of construction, and especially this logic that will guarantee us. We were mentioning these advances and these components not long ago, so we can say that the program is going to turn almost 4 years old already, and these components which are already in their final stage, and how we thought about them and what are we missing. And what we're missing are those productive projects that are so important for these women, that are connected with technical assistance, so we can get to know these competencies and skills that are different among men and women, as we were speaking throughout this day with our colleagues. And this is definitely going to be an outcome at the moment when we're going to have these 20 productive lines, so we can have women with coffee, with cocoa, with the communitary side, and from all these gaps and the reduction of, I believe, is fundamental to continue and carry out all the endeavors in this central. And we're talking about the participation of the women's
towards equitable conditions.
And we have had a growth that we have had a fantastic ones, and then what we have of women, and then we have to what we have to of the ones that then we have, and then we have the ones that we have to them, so that we have the logic of participation, and the interest of these communities and these instances is fundamental. And then we also have that logic of building the community and so on. And then what we have is there the exercise of yesterday, or excuse me, of last year, I mean, of the logic that we have. And there we also connected in the importance and the strengthening of social capabilities that we have there, from the logic of the Ministry of the Interiors to strengthen the guarantees and the defenders of rights. And once again, under this logic, we have the productive cycles, and how do we connect with them within the framework of legality, and also much to the contrary to what the roles that companies can play. So we had to put a lens of what can be this economy of care that enables one to recognize and to value those activities has been denaturalized and sort of not appreciated in solidarities. This was the logic of closing the gaps. And of course, we also ended up having this protection line, the gender-based violence from the private realm that live there, and from the public realm, when we exercise this participation as leaders in their communities, as representatives of the community, the local community ones, and the 1,500 ones of associations and so on. And then we have there of the processes, so that clearly there is a logic that then what we have is we need to have in the radar to generate those conditions so that these work, and we connect it from this logic that is functional of the indicator of the sort of the social fabric, so that they can have elements that can help them to incorporate the gender difference. That is like our gateway of entry for this logic of intervention, for us to have results that are continuous and especially measurable throughout the intervention. This is what we wanted to share with you very quickly, how we have been opening paths and what has been our experiences in the direction and the gender focus. Thank you very much, Camilio, and we are open to questions. Right. Thank you, Diana. Thank you very much for sharing your experience from the Directorate of Substituting Illicit Crops in ART. And now I would like to hand over the mic to Edna. Excuse me, Eve. To Eve, and she's connected from Berlin. And we're much obliged that we know that the hours are different for you. You're 7 hours ahead of time, but she's going to share with us from the research focus how she has been working and socializing all these problems. So please, Eve, your things. Thank you very much, Camilo, and thank you for Adriana, for Sandra, and well, I just have to say a couple of things more, and then we will start with the fact that many women have contributed to this issue and what I can provide with my experiences. And I think that I want to say thank you very much for the invitation. Really, it is a pleasure to be able to participate and to address you. Eva, thank you very much. Can you help us to broaden your presentation? If you could pull it full screen so it can be easily read. Thank you. Yes, of course I can do that. Excuse me. I chose directly the topic of block 3 as the topic of my presentation, and I want to be pro-positive and optimistic, and looking always towards solutions for rural women in their pathway to alternative development with equity, empowerment, and peace. But I want to tell you from the onset that I am not going to present many data and projects and so on, but rather elements that have to do with these 3 dimensions: empowerment and citizenship, and these elements and conclusions that I present refer to the work experiences in areas of these coca crops, and in areas where they have areas that were in transition to change the crops, in which I worked for a long time, and obviously not only with the colleagues from Peru, Bolivia, and Colombia, and they actually helped me very much for many years, and we have performed different diagnosis and participative research and development projects, and we worked plenty with indigenous rural women, their communities, and that actually allowed us to have many lessons learned and recommendation that I here present at a personal as a personal perspective, a result of all the work that was performed in the years of the 90s and in the midst of the first decade of this century. So now they were youngsters at that time, but actually seeing there the challenges that we have already defined by the Agenda 2030 and the crops that we have for the development, and seeing also the studies and the recent data and listening to what we have today throughout the day that we have exposed there. And we have some of the conclusions and recommendations are still valid. Well, I would like to give a brief overview of a rural woman and to make a couple of points in respect of this and its development, and then also to start each one with an example from Peru, because I worked the greatest amount of years
and in the greatest number of coca growing areas in Peru in respect of empowerment, citizenship, and at the end of focusing in certain recommendations that are specific for the alternative development. So, who is that rural woman? How do we sort of sketch her? First, it cannot be stereotyped. There's not one typical rural woman. There are many facades to all of this, but I found that there's certain shared needs among these rural women. And the first point that came to mind that drew my attention, there is a great creativity of the rural woman, and then and tell them that we have here of all these rural women that have very different realities, and this is our farming women, their indigenous communities, some from the jungle, some from the mountain, and so on. And we have had them in these studies in the context of each cultural and geographical context. Tell them that this is needed for all their development, each of all these coca growing areas and so on. And they have at that organizational level, and because of their natural ones and their own history of how they handle, for example, resources or future plans. So it's kind of like a first call to attention to be able to differentiate that, and who have been working in this context of these rural women, and perhaps how they can project themselves into the future. In my criteria, we have found in common, like the victims of or rural women share their existence, including their health, and their vision of the futures is really tied very closely to the land and to natural resources, and with that to the environment. As producers, owners of small companies and so on, as craftsmen and craftswomen, they don't live in the cities. They can't go and buy food in the supermarket. They can take the bus to go to the office. It's totally a different way of life. So with the body, with my existence, with my health, with my projection towards the future, this is where I have to reconnect with the natural resources that are in my environment. This is like a strategic affair, as more as an existential one, just as well. And the work, we have to show it or flatter it because it is vital for food security of the farm as well as the big cities, and it is important for the preservation of the natural resources, of the know-hows about the natural resources that we already know, and how this work is vital for the reproduction of the social and cultural life in their respective venues. Women, rural women, are protagonists of their own development, and then we have found many diagnoses that we actually did with entire communities in many coca growing basins that are of different characteristics, but we've always found that women, rural women, are protagonists at the family level and at the labor level. They handle products, they control plague control on crops, they protect domestic animals, the family's health. They are saleswomen, educators, teachers of their own children, and a way of solving crises of conflict. They're just fighters to defend their families. They're pioneers in opening new paths in order for them to overcome situations of suffering and gray matters. And in spite of all of that, we also have to evidence, and not only in my times, but perhaps now in this time, but these are occurrences of Diana and Sandra. You would like to tell me to see, because they're very visible, because it is then when we have this context within the world that they're just barely visible, these rural farming women, and many a times their work is actually described as assistance, as aid. It doesn't have any remuneration, and that is also the reason why it makes it so difficult, and we find that this work becomes informal work, and there are certain rights that they have not been respected, and it makes them invisible. And the FAO sees a problem in this because rural women in Latin America ever more are poor. In respect of 40% of them actually has their own income, and only 30% have their own farming land. That's what Oxfam says. And those farming lands are the fertile territories that are actually owned by these people. I refer now with that figure. Worldwide figures are pretty much the same. So we have seen that it's not so easy, the conditions that they are living in. And if they do have a shared vision of development, yes, and it's not like that, but although today we get to see that several times is a job that you have to do every day, and it has to go there. But I believe that their vision of development is more sustainable than with other environments because it gathers certain aspects of the economic and of the social, and it integrates social processes at the level or the realm of the family and of the community, for example. And for me, that is a vision for development that is far more not so short term, but rather more sustainable in the medium and long term. Also, we have heard today that they opt for a diversified development in order to reduce risks, and not also to focus on these risks and adventures. They tend to opt for social and economic stability, and then seeing how they generate that. This is a very important aspect in the concept of developing their life of their children. And I think that babies, we've all heard this, that all actually want to progress, that our children would be better than us, more educated, so that they actually go there. That is one of those ways to look there, and that is not something that is unreachable. That is my criteria. Native American communities call it this plan of care, so that they can care there of all their young, and they're 24 years of age when they begin to speak of the development. They plan for an entire generation. So it is interesting to see those looks towards the development of all those ties, how people actually move this. And then my criteria is actually the role of what they have understand of this view of what development is for the community. And I think that this alternative development and the illicit production, and let's just say that we're going to speak with this condition of drug trafficking without the protagonistic role of women, it is not viable. It is viable, but it's not going to be successful. And that's one of the conclusions that we already have. And that is worth more than anything else in areas of drug trafficking, in parallel economies, and then to have some illegal trade. And then there are certain scenarios where we have done all these studies in situations that actually demand a lot of resources. I want to mention one example of Ardiarraga in Peru, which is that part where you have from the Andes and where the Amazon start, and that's where they had to do, and that's where they planted the coca leaf. And in the 90s, mid 90s, in 96, 97, the demand and the bonanza associated to drug traffic and trade, once with one hit, perhaps and we did a lot of interviews there in that areas with all those families, and a producer lady that actually I was overwhelmed by her experience, her suffering, and she said we had everything economically speaking, we had all the money in the world, and she was referring to the fact that they had food 3 meals a day, and there was money for clothing and to go out to party, but the impact of that bonanza, of that easy money, led their children to easy money, and they forgot about school. So it's a generation without any education at that time, because from the 12 years of age they began to dedicate to coca paste and the like, but they never dedicated themselves to study. And the husbands abandoned the families, and then they went for the fun life and so on. So socially, they have had, and they understood all too well that that was not ever going to be an alternative of life for these people. What they actually wanted to is to live a life the way they've always known to live their life. So for me, the lesson learned there was that there was the strong presence of drug trafficking that actually dominates the economy. It had many implications for women. What did it mean? It actually meant a dimension of violence, of more violence in their life. And before, they used to have that about their crops, about their children, about their husbands, and directly on them. There was also violence, physical violence, sexual violence. So they didn't have a legal possible response. So there we have a part of that presentation, and we have this option of alternate development. And then they come in the double sense of the word, because they have the development that actually had full rights, and they had this waiting time and what they had to live in their lands in certain parts of or certain regions there. So if you actually begin to look at equity issues, I would prefer here to have the access, because equity is also a very complex matter. I only refer to the access to resources, the natural resource, because I think this is existential for the development and for women too. And here I have an example of a valley that, when the business of the cocoa leaf and the cocoa paste in the valley province, and when it was lower, when the armed conflict got lower too, there were thousands of rural women who were widowed now, who were abandoned, women with large families, and because they were women, they were left without land, without food, without resources, without rights, and without access to the economy. The result was obvious. I have seen many orphan children, hungry women, extreme poverty. They didn't have even chickens, nor any production means, nor land that they could exploit. There was no sort of realm of action or reaction. So the alternative development really didn't have that many benefits, because the land was already devastated. So considering this situation, I have also learned that the women that have gone through all of this, even more so than men, have understood the dynamics of the drug trade and the consequences of the lack of rights, and in this case the right to have access to land and to those natural resources that are productive resources. And with that, this aspect, rural women and equity, I want to highlight the need or the importance that women must also want to have access to resources. And then what we have there, and that means that in our context they would need to have access to education, to technical assistance, to the professionalization of their produce, to assure the productive base individually. They don't even have husbands, and there's a, and then we have, and then we have there, and we have the family level, and then we have the access there, and then we have there that we have there to actually manage their raw materials. So for example, the ones that don't have, and then we see, and it's not the object, and then we have a credit, and then they follow there that if we would have had, and then and there's a, at that time, then we could have had some reaction power and so on. We could have fed our children then we have there the production and actually followed and progress rails, and that's what we have there of what we have, that it's terrible with the terrible consequences that they had to live through. And then we have there the aspects, and I would say that it's important to put the values of the concepts of women in respect of the family economy that actually encompasses a medium and long-term approach. Also, we must value perhaps the 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 productive work with the non-paid productive work and so on. With this context, where which women whose part of the job is reproduction and housework. No, because the reproductive job is not necessarily a sexual work of providing children to someone and so on. Actually, the health of the home, it actually has to do with natural resources and with production. So these are all terms that we use lightly in the analysis, but what we have to do is to have a very good look as to how we see it. So then we have the access of women to the production processes. I think that that is key. And today, in what is possible to include it, the digitized means, because as we all know, with all of this, we handle many things today. The credit or the information of the market price of cocoa or coffee, or the credit conditions that one we have. And then we have this aspect of empowering women. I would like to give a brief overview in terms of the public realm and public posts. And then we have another example of Otovalle that is called Bahía Machientiene, in the central area of Peru, has also lived very difficult times in these years up until 2013 in terms of drug trafficking, armed violence, Sendero Luminoso, and the civil population between the violence and that of the armed groups, the drug trafficking violence, and perhaps the situation that was very personal of health, that it was violence that was exported from the city to the rural areas because they didn't want to live that armed conflict, and then the men of the self-defense group to actually defend their chakras and their communities. So actually there were left communities without men in them, and then the women occupied important positions of leadership, and they would assume posts and responsibilities. And here you can see them, how they occupied roles like a dean of a school, mayor. They organized the associations of producer communities, and they did so all too well. And all of that was that stage that was very well recognized by the association up until the men came back and the conflict was actually settled, and people come back and there's, now we're back, so now this is my house, so we have to be mayor, to be the dean of the school and so on. That happened, and it's a story that is not very well told. We rescued it with people because we also worked with them several years, and what happened there is what we had that aspect in the collective memory of women and their communities, that experience, that positive experience that women were brave and were able to lead and were able to be good managers in the schools and in the mayor's office. The consequence of that experience is that in the area, in the Andean and Amazonic region, uh, all the grassroots organizations and all the organizations, you increase the presence and the participation of women in the long term. And today in Peru, public structures and also the protagonism of women in grassroots organization is quite significant, is good, it's developing, and this actually is generating some experiences that women can have. So in this lesson learned, I think that it is important to support the representation of women in the public realm, not only in moments of crises, but actually to integrate their proposals and to know how they can actually do their management capacity. That is not something you learned overnight in some training course of the like and some orientation. No, you need to have it better, and not only is that due to our special one, it's also to the fundamental right of participating and to be having there of the strategic to implement actively the citizens' rights of women. In my criteria, that's important, and that is part of the representation. Is not because people apply them or the crisis required, but this is a human right. This is a citizen's right. And the last aspect, that of citizenship, women who are citizens, also in citizenship you have many aspects, and I would prefer only to have one, so that we have this development in peace. And I think that gender violence, as well as the Diana mentioned in her presentation, it is more sustainable, peaceful development. And then women in the rural areas, actually they need a lot of environmental issues to be living away from all these, again having access to all these services. It is believed that they have a lot of discrimination, high levels of violence, and that is also an important point. The perpetrators of that violence usually never get punished many a times, and that has structural reasons, I beg your pardon, and social regions, because we have an indirect association of that violence that does exist, and Diana also called narcotized violence or narcotics violence, so that we have there a set of rules of a shadow economy from drug trafficking assets of the realm and the legal one that actually dominates, and on that you have these legal practices now. So what that means for the aspects of women and citizenship. So I think that in this topic we also understand some alternative development and progress. Here we have to highlight that within the citizens' rights, they have the right to be protected from violence as a citizen, and they don't really know of the right to non-violence really by international law. There we have, it's the convention of eliminating all forms of discrimination. The UN Declaration, you also have the constitution of the respective countries and so on. And what you have there is this right with with their institutions, with their structures, with their institutions, and can do this. And this means to implement actually institutions with integral concepts. methods of intervention, judicial counseling, legal counseling for lawsuits and the like. And I think that the non-impunity, not only just me, I think studies actually confirm that non-impunity in the violence market and the access to justice for victims and the non-tolerance of violence against women in private or in public is essential for a successful development. That has been confirmed by studies because gender violence, one of the obstacles, or perhaps the largest obstacle for a sustained development, because it affects physically, mentally, psychologically, inhibits them so that women can get educated as they wish, or to develop as they wish, or to work in whatever they like. So this is also a key of the violence as well as impunity. The example that gender violence is left in impunity, actually what it does is to generate more violence because they know no one's going to get punished, and that has been also evidenced in the statistics. Gender violence, if not punished or not prosecuted or not legally sanctioned, it reproduces in the collective way, and at the end of the day you end up having something as a normal, yeah, right? So in Peru, to just give you an example, after the conflicts of drug trafficking and armed violence, when that was finished by the end of the year 2000, it was the Commission of Truth and Reconciliation that actually recognized the victims of sexual violence and gender violence, that the drug traffickers, and it was a very important process to make visible the issue of aiding people who have been traumatized psychologically and physically, and that he was able to say that we have to do something better and so on. So now we have to work with that topic, and then we have there, and then we have done there in the future and so on. And now in Peru we have a whole a set of centers, and as I said before, that are intervention centers that prevent. Also, you have them in Bolivia and in Colombia, and they actually can offer some caring routes. And especially the great things here in Colombia is that now that you have this peace agreement, actually integrates automatically these intervention, and the state were committed to provide specialized care. And I find this to be very important because women have the rights to be protected against gender violence, and they need to take concrete action in many sites to improve the prevention and the care, as well as access to justice, for example, or the care provided to any victims of violence. And there, I think that is very necessary to integrate men and youngsters to the prevention work in gender violence and in the construction of a peaceful coexistence in the context there of post-conflict. Eva, excuse me, we have 2 minutes left to kind of do this. Yes, yes, thank you very much. And then, okay, so we have 2 minutes.
So the gender violence in a collective way, and this is key for the state for the sustainable development, and last but not least important, to create alternatives in this context and this topic. It would be, well, analyzing the gender violence, moving the access to all these resources to protect and foster all the presentations, to value their focus on development, and to foster the no violence law that should be a crucial concern to develop different alternatives for them. Thank you very much for your attention. Sharing this vast experience that you have had for almost 30 years in these three countries is quite valuable for us. I would allow myself to highlight the most important topics of the intervention. I believe it's very interesting the proposal that Sandra made, because this leadership that Sandra has had to motivate and transit to a community towards legality is does not just stay there. It was so important and valuable that this transit is so challenging, and she created some differentiating products through all this and was able to position her coffee in some specialized niches and markets. This coffee has been producing by the cooperative that Sandra is leading. Is not only a coffee of alternative development in this institutional part, but it's also a coffee that has been certified in the fair trade. It's a coffee that has been certified by the organic part, and it's also coffee that fosters the women rights. In this certification for women is very interesting to have this process, and we have some questions that are around this topic for Sandra. From Diana, I believe it's very interesting. I believe this program is very interesting where she's working through the leadership that this was founded in 27 through the peace agreements, and perhaps this unit that she created began to work perhaps a year and a half ago, but how to improve some actions to include all the gender focus in this development program that we did not have before. I know this work that has been carried out in such short time has allowed itself to have a lot of success, something that has been linked through all these women for such short time. They have cleared and recognized their roles, and it's been so important how to create these alignments that are general and are already being included in such different components that we have now. So this has been a titanic task to include all these affirmative actions. This is the reduction of breaches, of gaps, and the reduction of in the public order, and to reinforce all the competencies and skill sets that women have in these territories. And of course, the outcome of being able to increase women's participation in all these decision making programs spaces with different instances, and from the SDCC, how they've been able to incorporate women's participation in all these spaces that are for decision making in these programs. So Eva is giving us some important supplies through or provisions through all this experience that she has brought from those three countries, and this presentation shows different phases and shared productions. So dep- independently from the nationalities, we can see what Eva said, and we were already announcing this from the morning time, and it's the starting role that women have in these rural sectors to be able to carry all these actions out. The women's role, without the women's role, we will not have any development, and we will see this with time. So she's identifying this, and she's giving us some clues to be able, perhaps I will forget some, but something that drew my attention was to join forces with women, which lands, infrastructures, so they can take them towards the development of their communities through the non-impunity to guarantee justice to these women and these territories that have suffered so much for decades and decades. It is very important, again, with the fostering thing on the participation of women in all these decision-making spaces, when these localities, these townships, because the violence, how we saw the development when women were in these spaces. So it's very important to have women's representation in all these spaces, and this is the degree that women understand, given to all the researches that Eva carried out, and they understand the consequences with all the dynamics, which is quite cruel, devastating in drug trafficking. They're more aware on what the scopes can be with that drug trafficking can have in these territories and in their families, and this analysis will allow women to dimension this problem and to help so we will not have these drug trafficking and violence scenarios. Is very important to mention before these programs. We have to carry out an analysis in gender and the non-violence tolerance towards women. We have a very short time. I'm going to allow myself in these last minutes that we have left to ask some questions. Chat has been moving a lot here in the different networks, and we're going to change the dynamic a little bit. We have several questions, so we're going to ask these specific questions for each one of the panelists, and I'm going to begin with Sandra. They're asking us, what can you attribute that there's such few women incorporated in this corporation, and how was the process of bonding for this cooperative? Go ahead, Sandra. All right, so one of these main inconveniences that women have in my zone is the property, to have the land. This is one of the limitations. So we also have to sum up, if they are hired, their husbands won't allow them because they have to carry out their housework and they have to tend their children. And because of this reason, they find themselves prohibited from being able to register in our cooperative. All the women that are within our organization, we have had to help them from their husbands, speak to the husbands for those, and explain to them about the importance of allowing her to participate, for her to be trained, and to show the man that he can also carry out housework like making lunch, like helping to prepare the children to go to school, and that would allow her woman to have the space. And this is the case of those who have husbands, and those that are single. It says, oh, I don't have somebody to help me around the house, I don't have anybody to help me with my children, so I can't go, and says I can't go to the meetings or the trainings because of these reasons. Well, you know, they have to be active, so they limitate themselves to not being able to go. Thank you very much, Sandra. Diana, the public is asking us what correspondence that this implementation framework has with everything around the peace agreement. Go ahead, Adriana. Thank you, Camila. Thank you for the question. Effectively, within this logic, we have 51 indicators in this implementation framework during 15 years as a state policy, and how this co-responsibility, we are in charge of 7 of these indicators. So I would say that from the strategical part, the gender protocols of public arts, and from the attention towards women for productive projects, the participation and leaderships in the female side. So what we did was that we made sure that this protocol, which is our entry door, our dialogue on all the actions that we would like to implement, to have a direct relationship with all these analysis lines in the women's equity. And as I was telling you not long ago, in the territory, the follow-up segments, we are connecting each one of the analysis in a specific way, the ones we presented in this protocol, that will allow us to help them and to speak to them about their autonomy and participation, all the decision-making scenarios at a communitary level, and everything that is around the peace construction connected, as it was well mentioned by Eva, to guarantee a life violence free or free of violence, and we made this match on how these indicators and institutional commitments long term will connect themselves in a perfect way with our lines and with our work axis. So, Diana, thank you very much for your statements. Carlos. Well, now we have some questions for Eva from our participants. They're asking, Eva, do you believe that agriculture is the main road to reduce the inequalities in the rural areas? What other alternatives can women find in Latin America and these rural areas to improve their income and to reduce gaps? Go ahead, Eva. All right, thank you for the question. This is very difficult to say, but I believe that from the resources that we have, agriculture is one thing, but arts, crafts can be something else that we find in rural areas. I believe that we can also, well, depending on the situation of each of these zones, we have tourism, we got have ecotourism, we have high cultural interest. So we can have a combination of many potential things to help these women in these zones, specifically by zone, or to see what potentials each zone has. I believe that perhaps this is something that I would like to debate in the NGOs around the world on this topic, the extractive model that we all practice, and how to handle it in a better way so we can protect the world in the future with around all these resources and from us as well. So I believe that there are many new things that are going to come in the energy sector and the green sector, as it is called now. So I don't believe it's just the agricultural part of, because we're having so many changes around the world on how to produce and how to consume and how to live, more important. Thank you very much, Eva. All right, to our panelists and to our public in general for your participation. I believe with this, we will be closing this third block. I would like, before wrapping this up, I would like to invite all the attendees to tomorrow's event. We're going to begin at 8:30 in the morning, and I believe it's going to be about the trade of illicit drugs and addressing all the criminal activities in regards to gender. So with this, we will be wrapping it up, and thank you very much for the participation from our panelists and for you to have a very beautiful afternoon.